The palace, meanwhile, faced a delicate balancing act. On one hand, it needed to maintain decorum, uphold tradition, and assert authority. On the other hand, it had to respond to unprecedented media amplification and global scrutiny. Courtiers and advisors worked tirelessly, drafting statements, arranging engagements, and advising Meghan and Harry on protocol. Yet despite these efforts, the pace of modern communication ensured that the narrative often outstripped control, leaving the couple in a constantly reactive position. Insiders emphasized that the public jibe had a psychological impact as well. Meghan, who had long navigated fame, media, and public attention with skill, was confronted with the stark reality of royal power, the ability of tradition, symbolism, and authority to shape perception instantaneously and globally. The title of Duchess of Zlisters was no longer abstract. It was a live, viral event with implications for image, influence, and personal dignity. Harry, observing this, became increasingly protective, ensuring Meghan's emotional well-being while navigating the complex dynamics of public perception and family loyalty. By the end of this chapter, it was clear that the king's remark had escalated the situation to an entirely new level. The title, once a private slight, had become a global narrative, scrutinized, debated, and viral. Meghan and Harry were forced to navigate a labyrinth of emotion, strategy, and public perception. Every move mattered, every word carried weight, and every public appearance became a potential turning point. The palace, with its centuries-old walls, hidden corridors, and secret chambers, had always been a place where whispers mattered as much as proclamations. But even by these standards, the private meeting convened shortly after the king's public jibe was extraordinary. What began as a routine strategy session among senior advisors and family members quickly transformed into a dramatic showdown, one that insiders say shook the palace to its very foundations. According to sources, the meeting was called in response to escalating media coverage and the viral attention surrounding Meghan's new title. Courtiers, advisors, and family confidants gathered in a secluded chamber where tension was thick enough to feel physically. Every word, gesture, and glance carried significance. The king, Harry, Meghan, and select aides were present, forming a delicate balance of power, loyalty, and emotion. Every participant understood that the stakes were enormous. A single misstep could trigger public scandal, damage familial relationships, or permanently alter the perception of the monarchy. The meeting reportedly began with formal updates, media coverage, social media trends, and analyses of public sentiment. Advisors meticulously outlined the extent of the viral frenzy, highlighting both supportive and critical responses. Harry and Meghan listened intently, absorbing the data while processing the emotional impact of the king's public jibe. Observers described Meghan's demeanor as controlled, yet simmering beneath the surface was a potent mix of anger, frustration, and determination. Harry, ever the protector, maintained a calm exterior, ready to mediate, defend, and strategize. Tensions escalated quickly when the discussion turned to the king himself. Sources described Charles's demeanor as calm, almost casual, but with a sharp undercurrent of authority. He defended his choice to publicly reference Meghan's title, framing it as a light-hearted acknowledgement rather than an insult. Yet the subtlety of his delivery and the historical weight of the words were not lost on anyone present. For Meghan and Harry, it was clear that the king's remark was both intentional and calculated, a reminder that the monarchy operates on rules, symbols, and hierarchies that cannot be ignored. The conversation quickly grew heated. Meghan challenged the logic and intent behind the title, questioning why it was necessary to publicly humiliate her, particularly in front of global audiences. Her voice, controlled yet firm, echoed through the chamber. "Why turn a title into ridicule?" she asked. "Why mock me in a way that undermines both my dignity and my public work?" Harry supported her, emphasizing the emotional and strategic impact of the jibe, highlighting how it could influence public perception and destabilize their carefully curated image. Insiders say that the tension reached a peak when other family members and advisors weighed in. Some expressed sympathy for Meghan, acknowledging the cruelty of the title and the public humiliation it represented. Others aligned with the king, suggesting that the remark was minor, humorous, and within his authority. The room reportedly became a battlefield of ideology, tradition, and emotion, with loyalties tested and alliances subtly revealed. Every participant understood that their words could have long-term ramifications, both personally and institutionally. A particularly dramatic moment occurred when Meghan, refusing to back down, invoked historical precedent. She highlighted examples of royal titles used as instruments of humiliation, emphasizing that the strategy behind her new designation was neither trivial nor playful. Sources indicate that the king listened attentively, a flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes, yet his expression remained composed. Harry, meanwhile, reinforced Meghan's points with precision, emphasizing the strategic risks of public perception and the potential backlash from media and global audiences. The meeting also revealed the palace's internal divisions. Advisors reportedly debated whether to contain the situation quietly or allow it to escalate, weighing both institutional loyalty and personal relationships. Some courtiers advocated for a mediated resolution, suggesting private apologies or symbolic gestures to repair relationships. Others favored strategic silence, allowing Meghan's public presence and the viral attention to gradually normalize. The clash of perspectives underscored the complexity of modern royal life, centuries-old traditions intersecting with instant global scrutiny, requiring decisions that balance diplomacy, emotion, and perception. Sources also revealed private, unscheduled exchanges outside the formal agenda. Hallway conversations, whispered warnings, and discreet consultations added layers of intrigue. Some insiders suggested that these moments were even more impactful than the formal discussion, shaping strategic thinking and revealing personal alliances. Meghan, sources say, absorbed every word, every nuance, using the information to plan measured responses that would reclaim dignity while countering humiliation. Harry's protective instincts ensured that these exchanges reinforced, rather than undermined, their coordinated approach. One of the most striking aspects of the meeting was Meghan's ability to assert control without overt confrontation. She combined emotional intelligence, historical knowledge, and strategic foresight, crafting arguments that highlighted the personal and public stakes of the king's jibe. Observers noted that her composure, even in the midst of heightened tension, was a testament to her resilience and tactical acumen. Harry's support was integral, providing both emotional reinforcement and strategic alignment, ensuring that every argument was grounded in both personal dignity and public strategy. The meeting concluded with no definitive resolution, leaving the palace in a state of heightened anticipation. Sources described the atmosphere as tense, charged, and expectant. Everyone understood that this was not merely a disagreement over words. It was a defining moment, a test of influence, authority, and resilience. The king had asserted his authority, Meghan had defended her dignity, and Harry had positioned himself as both mediator and protector. The balance of power remained fluid, and every subsequent move would carry immense significance. Insiders suggest that the fallout from the meeting was immediate. Leaks, strategically or accidentally released, began appearing in media outlets, offering fragments of the tense discussion. Analysts, journalists, and social media commentators dissected the dynamics, speculating on alliances, disagreements, and potential next steps. The palace, once a controlled environment of whispers and ceremony, had become a theater of speculation, where private strategies collided with public fascination. By the end of the chapter, it was clear that the private meeting had shifted the stakes dramatically. Meghan's resilience, Harry's protective instincts, and the king's strategic assertion of authority had created a dynamic fraught with tension, uncertainty, and potential for further escalation. Every participant now understood that the coming days would be pivotal, with consequences that could redefine family relationships, public perception, and institutional authority. While the public saw the king's sly comment as a spontaneous jibe, insiders reveal a far more intricate story behind the creation of Meghan's new title, the Duchess of Z-listers. This was not a casual remark born of whimsy. It was a calculated decision, the product of palace strategy, historical insight, and meticulous intent. Understanding its origins requires a deep dive into the palace's inner workings, where symbolism, hierarchy, and subtle power plays converge in ways few outside the institution can comprehend. According to multiple sources, the idea for the title originated months before it was publicly uttered. Advisors close to the king had been observing Meghan's growing influence, public visibility, and media savvy, analyzing how her presence and celebrity had reshaped traditional royal narratives. Some courtiers expressed concern that Meghan's high-profile advocacy, media attention, and Hollywood experience allowed her to wield influence beyond what the monarchy was comfortable with. The creation of a seemingly playful, yet subtly diminishing title was a strategic move designed to recalibrate her perceived status within the institution. The palace's communications team reportedly conducted extensive research on historical precedents. Documents, archives, and correspondence dating back centuries were consulted to understand how titles could function as instruments of subtle power, humiliation, or social signaling. Examples range from ironic noble designations to honorary positions deliberately designed to lack real influence. The research revealed a recurring pattern. Well-placed titles, delivered with precision, could redefine perceptions without requiring overt confrontation. The monarchy's history was replete with these examples, and advisors recognized the potential for applying a modern twist. Sources indicate that the king was deeply involved in the conceptualization. While advisors crafted the title, strategized messaging, and prepared contingencies, Charles himself reportedly insisted on the tone, timing, and phrasing. The Z-lister designation was selected with careful attention to connotation. It was a nod to contemporary culture, immediately recognizable to the public, yet layered with subtle insult. The term suggested superficial celebrity, limited influence, and social marginality, qualities diametrically opposed to the gravitas, respect, and authority associated with traditional royal titles. In effect, it was a masterstroke of symbolism, modern, viral-ready, yet deeply humiliating. The intent behind the title, insiders claim, was multifaceted. First, it aimed to assert hierarchy within the royal family, subtly reminding Meghan of her relative position and the boundaries of influence. Second, it functioned as a public recalibration of perception, signaling to media, supporters, and critics that her prominence, while high-profile, was conditional and subject to scrutiny. Third, it acted as a test, probing her resilience, composure, and strategic response. By observing her reaction, the palace could gauge both her emotional intelligence and her tactical savvy, qualities that are constantly evaluated in the context of public scrutiny and royal duty. Interestingly, sources reveal that the title was also influenced by ongoing palace frustrations with Meghan's public narrative. Over the past few years, her media presence, social advocacy, and selective disclosures had disrupted traditional royal messaging, sometimes drawing attention away from institutional priorities. By assigning a title with both symbolic and public visibility, the palace sought to reclaim control of the narrative, subtly asserting authority over how Meghan's role and influence were perceived. In this sense, the Duchess of Z-listers was as much a communication strategy as it was a symbolic gesture. Advisors also reportedly conducted risk assessments. They considered potential backlash, media amplification, and social media response, modeling scenarios ranging from minimal attention to global virality. While the risks were acknowledged, the palace concluded that the symbolic benefits outweighed potential drawbacks. Charles's delivery, in public, was designed to maximize impact while maintaining plausible deniability, framed as humor, lightly sarcastic, yet carrying historical and social weight. The result was a title that could simultaneously amuse, humiliate, and assert authority. Insiders highlight the psychological sophistication behind the move. Royals are trained to operate in highly coded environments, where gestures, titles, and phrasing convey more than words alone. The title leveraged both historical understanding and modern media dynamics. By selecting a culturally resonant term and delivering it with calculated timing, the king effectively ensured that the public would engage, interpret, and debate the insult, all while signaling internal authority. For Meghan, the challenge was immediate. Respond too visibly, and risk escalating conflict. Respond too passively, and the humiliation could solidify. Sources further reveal that the title's creation involved private palace consultations with senior aides, historians, and even legal advisors. Every aspect was considered. How the term would translate across media, its reception among international audiences, and its potential to influence both formal and informal perceptions of Meghan. The meticulousness of this process underscores the deliberate nature of the insult. It was not impulsive or casual but calculated, strategic, and carefully timed to maximize both psychological and public impact. Another layer of intrigue emerged from the discovery that the title had been referenced in internal palace documents weeks before it became public. Correspondence suggested awareness that the phrase would likely trigger strong emotional responses, both from Meghan and from media outlets. Some courtiers reportedly expressed concern that the move could backfire, creating sympathy for Meghan or undermining the king's own image. Yet Charles, according to sources, dismissed these concerns, confident in the strategic calculation and historical precedent underpinning the decision. The revelation of the title's origins also cast new light on its delivery. Observers now understand that what seemed like an offhand public jibe was, in fact, the culmination of months of planning, internal debate, and strategic foresight. Every element, from word choice to timing, public forum to subtle humor, was designed to maximize impact, assert authority, and subtly diminish Meghan's perceived influence. In essence, the Duchess of Zlisters was a masterclass in symbolic power, blending centuries-old royal strategy with modern media dynamics. For Meghan and Harry, understanding this origin story added complexity to their response. They were not simply dealing with a spontaneous insult. They were confronting a premeditated, institutionally supported, historically informed, and strategically executed public humiliation. This knowledge reframed their strategy, requiring them to balance emotional reaction with tactical precision, public messaging with private diplomacy, and resilience with assertive reclamation of dignity. Every action had to counteract the insult without inflaming the calculated dynamics underlying it. And just when Meghan and Harry began to fully grasp the depth of the palace's strategy, a confidential leak surfaced, revealing private communications that exposed intentions and conversations even more explosive than the title itself. This leak threatened to shift the entire narrative, challenging both public perception and internal palace alliances. And no one could have predicted the chaos it would unleash. It all started with a question nobody expected to hear in the polished halls of Buckingham Palace. Could King Charles really cut Prince Harry and Meghan Markle out of his $770 million fortune? It sounds unthinkable, almost like something straight out of a Hollywood drama, but insiders say the shockwaves are very real. Picture this. A family, one of the most famous in the world, sitting atop unimaginable wealth, yet internal betrayal, laughter, and fury are tearing them apart in ways the public rarely sees. And at the center of it all, Prince William allegedly laughing as his younger brother and sister-in-law faced the consequences of a decision that would make headlines globally. You might think this is just tabloid fodder, but the truth goes deeper, darker, even more shocking than you could imagine. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The very mention of money in the royal family tends to stir curiosity, envy, and speculation. But this isn't about rumors. This is about financial power, family loyalty, and control over a fortune that could reshape the lives of those involved forever. The sum in question is staggering, $770 million. That's enough to buy dozens of mansions, yachts, private islands, and still leave millions to spare. And yet, when this fortune became the battleground for royal tension, what unfolded was a public spectacle of betrayal, manipulation, and what some insiders are calling a royal purge. But why now? Why was this decision made at this exact moment? The answer is tangled in personal feuds, perceived betrayals, and a desire for control that runs deeper than anyone could guess. To understand the full scope of this situation, you have to go back a little. Prince Harry, once the beloved younger son of Charles, grew increasingly distant from the monarchy in recent years. His marriage to Meghan Markle, while celebrated by some, became a source of tension in others' quarters. There were whispers in the palace corridors, quiet warnings that the couple's ambitions, outspoken nature, and media strategies were unsettling the delicate balance of royal tradition. And Meghan herself, often portrayed in the media as a determined, even unyielding figure, was said to have clashed repeatedly with advisors and insiders. You begin to see the picture forming, a perfect storm of family expectations, personal ambitions, and, ultimately, money. The $770 million wasn't just cash, it was influence, power, and, to some, the ultimate tool of control. Imagine the scene inside the palace the day the decision was finalized. Advisors moving quickly, lawyers drafting documents, subtle glances exchanged across corridors. Charles, with decades of experience in family dynamics and monarchy, knew the stakes. Every move had to be precise. One misstep, and the world would know, and it would be a scandal unlike any other. And what about William? The public face of calm, composure, and modern monarchy suddenly becomes part of the story. Laughter, yes, reportedly laughter, at his brother's predicament. But why? Was it schadenfreude, a calculated psychological maneuver, or something even more complex, a blend of satisfaction, vindication, and maybe even relief? These questions linger, unresolved, as the palace itself seems to hold its breath. From the outside, it might look like a simple financial decision. Cut them off, one could imagine Charles saying. But anyone familiar with the royal machine knows it's never that simple. Wealth at this scale is tied into trusts, legal instruments, properties, and long-term planning. Removing beneficiaries is not like taking a seat away at the dinner table. It requires strategy, negotiation, and careful timing. And insiders suggest that every step of this process was meticulously calculated to maximize impact, not just financially, but emotionally and psychologically. It's the kind of maneuver that changes relationships forever, that reshapes how people think of family loyalty and obligation. And in this case, it has sparked a drama of monumental proportions. Now let's talk about the human side. Because while $770 million is impressive, it's the reactions that make this story riveting. Imagine being Harry. You believed in family. You trusted the people who raised you, taught you, and guided you. And suddenly, a decision is made. One that removes your access to not just wealth, but security, and perhaps, in a symbolic way, your place within the family hierarchy. The betrayal feels immediate, sharp, and personal. And for Meghan, the stakes are just as high. She has fought hard to carve a space for herself in one of the most scrutinized families in the world, only to find that doors are closing, and that the public spectacle will amplify every moment of the fallout. Their reaction, of course, becomes part of the narrative, feeding media frenzy, social media debates, and endless speculation. The emotional stakes, frankly, are enormous. And this is where curiosity truly takes over. How exactly did Charles execute this? What were the conversations behind closed doors? Did William push for this? Was there a plan in place for years? And most importantly, what does this mean for the future of the monarchy, for Harry and Meghan, and for the public perception of royal fairness? These questions aren't just idle gossip. They are threads in a tapestry of family dynamics, power struggles, and public image management that could determine the trajectory of the royal family for generations. But here's the kicker. While most of the world watches from a distance, believing this is all just palace politics, there's a darker, almost cinematic element to it. Every move is watched, every reaction analyzed, every public statement weighed for hidden meaning. Sources hint at private conversations that were recorded, leaked documents, and perhaps even subtle manipulations of the media narrative to ensure that Harry and Meghan's removal would be not just effective, but humiliating. There's a certain irony here. The very tools they've used to shape their public image, interviews, social media, statements, may have been turned against them in a sophisticated strategy by the palace. And that irony? It's delicious, scandalous, and central to understanding the depth of this saga. It's also worth noting the timing. There's a reason this decision comes now, and it's not random. It aligns with recent public appearances, statements from the couple, and even certain philanthropic endeavors that were seen as overstepping traditional boundaries. Charles, according to sources, viewed these actions as signals that Harry and Meghan were not just drifting away from royal expectations. They were actively redefining their role, and in doing so, challenging the very authority of the family's financial and symbolic hierarchy. The removal from the fortune, then, becomes not just a financial act, but a statement. Boundaries exist. Crossing them has consequences, and the world is watching. For those following the story, there's also a strange mix of emotion: sympathy, judgment, disbelief, and fascination. Because at the end of the day, this is not just about numbers. It's about people who are human, flawed, and caught in a pressure cooker of history, expectation, and public scrutiny. Can you imagine the tension at breakfast tables, during meetings, or even in casual hallway interactions inside the palace? Every glance, every word, every subtle gesture could carry weight, the kind of weight that changes relationships forever. And for Harry and Meghan, every decision they've made, every statement they've given, suddenly takes on new significance. Nothing will ever be the same again. And that, ultimately, is why this story matters. It isn't just a tale of money, wealth, or inheritance. It's about power, perception, and the hidden mechanics of one of the most famous families in history. The stakes are enormous, and the outcomes ripple far beyond Buckingham Palace. Imagine the doors that have closed. Imagine the opportunities that might vanish. Imagine the family bonds tested to the breaking point. Now imagine the next move, the one that no one sees coming, the one that could either redeem or completely upend the lives of those involved. So here we are, at the very beginning of this story, poised on the edge of revelation. In the next chapters, we'll dive into the palace corridors, private meetings, secret strategies, and emotional storms that led to this unprecedented decision. You will hear about William's reactions, Meghan's furious counter-strategies, Harry's emotional turmoil, and the legal maneuvers that made this possible. And if you think you know how it ends, think again. Because in the world of royalty, where image is everything and power is absolute, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. It all started quietly, or at least, as quietly as a royal palace could operate when the world is watching. But make no mistake, behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, a storm was brewing. A storm that would shake the foundations of the royal family and leave Prince Harry and Meghan Markle reeling. This wasn't some passing rumor, some idle gossip for tabloids to feast on. This was a carefully orchestrated move, a purge, some insiders would later whisper, designed to strip the couple of access to King Charles's staggering $770 million fortune. And as the first pieces of this drama fell into place, nobody could predict just how personal, humiliating, and public it would become. The term purge might sound dramatic, but in this case, it fits. For decades, the royal family has been a masterclass in tradition, decorum, and subtlety. Money doesn't just vanish overnight, nor is it handed around recklessly. Every asset, every trust fund, every inheritance is controlled with precision, with lawyers, accountants, and advisors ensuring that not a penny is misplaced. So when Charles made the decision to remove Harry and Meghan from the financial fold, it wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate, strategic, and, according to palace insiders, ruthless. The first sign of trouble, some say, came not with a formal announcement, but with whispers in the corridors. Advisors noticed a shift in Charles's behavior. Private meetings, hushed phone calls, documents being reviewed with unprecedented urgency. These weren't the routine adjustments of a monarch managing his estate. These were moves that hinted at a larger, more dramatic plan. People close to the palace began to murmur, some alarmed, some excited, and some, inevitably, gossiping. But no one outside the inner circle knew the full scope of what was happening. For Harry and Meghan, the initial warning signs were subtle. Perhaps it was a delayed response to an email, or a change in tone during a conversation, or maybe a brief glance that carried the weight of 1,000 words. Royals, after all, are trained to read nuance in ways the public rarely comprehends. And while the couple had grown used to navigating criticism and media scrutiny, there was something different this time. Something deliberate, something targeted. Sources suggest that Charles, over months of observation, had come to a decision that shocked even longtime palace watchers. Harry and Meghan were no longer considered suitable heirs, not just in title, but in terms of the influence and access that came with his fortune. This was about more than money. It was about control, legacy, and, ultimately, family loyalty. In Charles's eyes, allowing Harry and Meghan continued access to his wealth posed risks that could not be ignored. But this purge wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. Imagine the meeting where the decision was first formally discussed. Charles, seated at the head of a long, polished table, advisors flanking him, documents spread out like a battlefield map. Every legal option was considered, every possible reaction predicted, and as the discussion progressed, it became clear that the removal of Harry and Meghan was not only feasible, it was inevitable. The question was no longer if it would happen, but how far it would go, and how publicly it would unfold. Meanwhile, word of the impending decision somehow began to leak. It started as a murmur, a casual remark among palace aides, and soon it had grown into something far more explosive. By the time Harry and Meghan caught wind of it, the air was already charged with tension. The couple, accustomed to media scrutiny but not the precise mechanisms of palace politics, faced a reality they could scarcely have imagined. They were about to be cut off, not as a consequence of their public actions alone, but as a strategic move designed to consolidate power and ensure that the future of the monarchy remained tightly controlled. And the psychological impact was immediate. Being excluded from a fortune of $770 million is staggering in its own right. But in this context, it was compounded by the emotional blow of familial rejection. Harry, once the carefree prince who could charm crowds with ease, found himself confronting feelings of betrayal and abandonment. Meghan, ever the strategist, realized that the challenge she faced was not merely public perception, but a very personal struggle against a system designed to marginalize her. Together, they were caught in a maelstrom that tested their resilience, loyalty, and, ultimately, their relationship. Insiders also note the role of Prince William in the unfolding drama. While Charles orchestrated the formal mechanisms of the purge, William's influence was subtle, yet significant. Some suggest that the elder brother's reaction went beyond mere observation. According to certain sources, he found a perverse satisfaction in watching Harry and Meghan face the consequences of their choices. Whether this was strategic, emotionally driven, or a mixture of both remains a matter of speculation. But the image of William's quiet, knowing laughter became one of the defining symbols of the early stages of the purge, a cruel punctuation mark on an already tense situation. Yet, as with any high-stakes drama, there were layers of complexity. Charles's advisors understood that this move could trigger backlash, both within the family and from the public. They meticulously plotted out communications, prepared statements, and even rehearsed potential responses to media inquiries. Everything had to be airtight, because once the story reached the public sphere, there would be no turning back. The financial purge, while executed behind palace walls, was bound to become a spectacle of global intrigue. At the heart of this unfolding drama was the sheer magnitude of Charles's fortune. $770 million is not just a number, it is a symbol of status, influence, and opportunity. It represents decades of accumulation, inheritance, investments, and the unspoken power dynamics that govern one of the most famous families in the world. For Harry and Meghan, losing access was not just a financial setback. It was a profound alteration of their life trajectory, a disruption of plans, and a recalibration of their public persona. Suddenly, the world was not just watching them. It was watching the consequences of their perceived choices and missteps. This purge also carried a message beyond the immediate family. The monarchy was watching, and any deviation from expected behavior could carry serious consequences. It was a warning shot, a reminder that wealth and privilege within the royal sphere are never absolute. Every move, every public statement, every perceived breach of protocol could influence access to power, influence, and legacy. Harry and Meghan, once secure in their positions as prominent members of the family, found themselves on precarious footing. And yet, the public remained largely unaware of the intricate planning taking place. Most people saw only headlines. Harry and Meghan cut off from fortune, royal family drama intensifies. William laughs as Harry faces financial consequences. What they didn't see were the countless hours of legal consultation, the hushed palace meetings, the detailed contingency planning, and the subtle psychological maneuvers at play. This was not simple inheritance management. It was strategy, high-level manipulation, and, Some would argue, calculated cruelty. The first chapter of The Purge, then, set the stage for everything that followed. It established the rules of engagement. Harry and Meghan would not only be removed from Charles's fortune, but they would also face the public, familial, and media consequences of that removal in real time. Every word they spoke, every appearance they made, would be scrutinized, dissected, and compared to the orchestrated narrative the palace intended to project. In effect, The Purge was as much about optics as it was about money. As this chapter closes, the stakes are clear. Harry and Meghan are on the brink of losing not just financial security, but family support, public image, and control over their own narrative. Charles has acted decisively. William's reaction adds a layer of emotional complexity. The world is watching, poised to judge. And yet, for all the planning, preparation, and orchestration, one question remains. How will Harry and Meghan respond? Will they accept their fate, or is there a counter-strategy lurking behind the scenes, waiting to turn the tables in a way nobody expects? When people hear $770 million, it's almost impossible to grasp the scale. To the average person, that's more than most could dream of in multiple lifetimes. Yet for the British royal family, it's not just money. It's influence, legacy, and the very essence of their power. And when King Charles made the decision to remove Prince Harry and Meghan Markle from this fortune, it wasn't just a financial move. It was a seismic shift in the balance of family power, with reverberations reaching every corner of the monarchy. To understand the drama unfolding, we need to break down what this fortune actually represents, and why losing access is far more than an economic inconvenience for Harry and Meghan. First, let's talk numbers. The $770 million isn't sitting in a single bank account. Much of it is tied up in estates, trusts, investments, and historic assets that have been accumulated over generations. Properties like Clarence House and various royal estates, private investments, artworks, and even stakes in certain businesses all contribute to this colossal figure. For Charles, these assets are carefully managed through a network of advisors and legal structures designed to protect the monarchy, ensure continuity, and limit exposure to risk. They are, in essence, the backbone of royal influence. Losing access to them is akin to losing a part of one's identity, especially when you were born into it. Harry and Meghan's removal from this fortune was not simply a matter of flipping a switch. It required intricate legal maneuvering. Trusts had to be restructured, beneficiary designations altered, and contingency plans prepared to prevent challenges. Advisors say this was months in the making, a meticulous plan executed with surgical precision. Every document was reviewed, every loophole closed, every potential counterattack anticipated. The goal was clear. Harry and Meghan would not only be excluded financially, but the process had to be irreversible, or at least incredibly difficult to contest. And yet, understanding the raw numbers only scratches the surface. Consider the implications of the fortune. It funds charitable foundations, maintains properties, underwrites travel, supports private staff, and essentially sustains the lifestyle expected of senior royals. For Harry and Meghan, losing access meant a sudden contraction in their operational and personal flexibility. It wasn't merely a loss of personal wealth. It was a loss of status, autonomy, and the ability to influence through resources. It's one thing to have wealth in the abstract. It's another to have it withdrawn in such a public and humiliating manner. This brings us to the human element, which is perhaps the most compelling part of this story. Harry, who has often been seen as the rebellious but still loyal son, suddenly found himself navigating a labyrinth of financial and emotional complexity. His life had been structured around access to resources that allowed him to pursue charitable endeavors, public projects, and personal investments. With the purge in motion, those pathways suddenly narrowed, forcing him to confront not just the logistical challenges of wealth loss, but the emotional blow of what it symbolized, familial rejection. Meghan, meanwhile, faced a different, yet equally daunting challenge. Known for her tenacity, strategic mind, and ability to navigate complex social dynamics, she had to contend with the abrupt removal of financial leverage she had come to rely on as part of her royal role. The fortune wasn't just money. It was a platform, a statement of influence, and a means to engage with causes she cared about. To have it stripped away was to challenge her identity, both publicly and privately. And unlike Harry, Meghan's role had always been under intense scrutiny, meaning every reaction, every move, would be analyzed and dissected by a global audience. It's also critical to understand the dynamics within the family. Prince William's reaction to the unfolding purge added a layer of psychological pressure. Insiders report that William was not merely observing. He was, in some ways, an active participant in the orchestration. Laughter, subtle smirks, and behind-the-scenes comments reportedly underscored a sense of satisfaction in seeing his younger brother and sister-in-law confronted with consequences. Whether this was strategic or emotional, it introduced a new variable into an already high-stakes situation. Harry and Meghan weren't just dealing with their father. They were navigating a complex web of sibling rivalry amplified by power, wealth, and legacy. The details of how the fortune is distributed are equally fascinating. Certain trusts were originally established to ensure that each royal had financial security while maintaining the family's long-term wealth. Typically, assets flow in a controlled manner. Investments generate income, estates provide benefits, and trusts dictate specific usage. The removal of Harry and Meghan required recalibrating these structures. Their names were formally removed from key trusts, access to certain properties was curtailed, and projected disbursements were redirected. This wasn't just a financial adjustment, it was a calculated statement. Access to resources is conditional, and deviations from family expectations carry consequences. And yet, the purge wasn't purely about punishment. Sources suggest it was also about signaling. To the rest of the family, it demonstrated the reach and authority of Charles's decisions. To advisors and staff, it reinforced the hierarchy and the boundaries of loyalty. And to the public, it sent a message about how serious the monarchy is about maintaining control over its wealth and influence. In short, this wasn't merely a financial act. It was a masterclass in power, executed with precision and amplified by psychological nuance. But what about the fallout for Harry and Meghan beyond the palace walls? Losing access to this fortune immediately altered their public and private options. Philanthropic initiatives, personal investments, and even lifestyle considerations suddenly faced new limitations. Public appearances, interviews, and other engagements that might have been supported or enabled by their previous access to resources now carried additional pressure. Every move became a negotiation between public perception, private ambition, and the constraints imposed by this unprecedented family decision. Interestingly, insiders note a subtle irony. Harry and Meghan, who have long navigated public scrutiny with careful messaging, now faced a scenario where wealth, family, and image collided in a way they could not fully control. The $770 million fortune, once a backdrop to their royal narrative, became the stage upon which the most personal and public drama of their lives was unfolding. Every legal adjustment, every advisory meeting, and every subtle interaction carried significance, not just financially, but emotionally and reputationally. And then there's the psychological impact of knowing who remains in favor. Charles's decision was final, or at least intended to be final. And William's laughter, subtle or not, intensified the blow. It wasn't simply that they lost access to funds. It was the realization that their place within the family hierarchy had been publicly and symbolically questioned. Trusts and legal documents aside, this was a moment of social and emotional purgation. The stakes were enormous, and for Harry and Meghan, every next step would be fraught with consequence. But what about the broader royal landscape? How does the redistribution of this fortune affect succession, public perception, and the power balance within the monarchy? By concentrating financial control more firmly with Charles and William, the message was unmistakable. The monarchy values loyalty and compliance. Deviations, however well-intentioned or publicly supported, risk exclusion. This adds a layer of strategic tension to every royal relationship, influencing decisions about public statements, charitable projects, and even personal alliances. As the dust settled from this first wave of the purge, the stage was set for escalating tension. Harry and Meghan were suddenly navigating a world where financial independence was no longer guaranteed, family bonds were strained, and public scrutiny intensified. And yet, the true drama was only beginning. Because in the world of royalty, money is rarely just about money. It is about power, image, and influence. And Charles's move to remove them from the $770 million fortune was a statement designed to leave no doubt. Family loyalty and adherence to tradition still govern the most intimate aspects of royal life. By the end of this chapter, the picture is clear. Harry and Meghan have lost not only access to wealth, but also a key measure of autonomy and influence within the family. Charles has acted decisively. William's subtle, but telling, reactions have added emotional weight. And the public, now aware of the situation, waits for the next move, curiosity mounting. It's one thing to orchestrate a purge, to make calculated decisions behind closed doors, to wield power and influence from the comfort of centuries-old traditions. It's another to watch the consequences unfold and feel a sense of satisfaction, or in this case, amusement, at the sheer impact of those decisions. Prince William, the elder brother, the public face of stability and modern monarchy, reportedly did just that. His reaction to the removal of Harry and Meghan from King Charles's $770 million fortune became one of the defining emotional threads of this unfolding drama. According to sources, William's initial response was subtle. A smirk here, a slight raise of the eyebrow there, hardly noticeable to those untrained in reading royal cues. But insiders familiar with the dynamics of the family claim that behind the polite facade, there was a distinct, almost gleeful sense of satisfaction. This wasn't schadenfreude in the ordinary sense. It was a complex blend of vindication, relief, and, yes, amusement. William had watched for years as his younger brother and sister-in-law increasingly challenged royal conventions, questioned traditions, and engaged with the media in ways that many within the palace deemed reckless. This moment, Harry and Meghan facing real consequences, was a validation of frustrations he had long harbored privately. Imagine the tension in the room. Advisors whispering, documents spread across polished tables, Charles delivering his carefully considered decisions, and William observing silently, a knowing look that seemed almost casual but carried immense weight. This subtle, calculated reaction set the tone for the internal narrative. Harry and Meghan were not only being excluded from wealth, they were now facing the emotional and psychological repercussions of being sidelined within the family. William's reaction underscored a truth often hidden from public view. The monarchy is as much about relationships, loyalties, and perception as it is about titles and money. The impact of William's behavior extends beyond mere observation. Sources suggest that his response influenced the broader palace environment, shaping how aides, advisors, and even distant family members perceive the unfolding events. When a figure as prominent as the Duke of Cambridge reacts with visible satisfaction, it sends subtle signals: approval, alignment with the decision, and, indirectly, pressure on those being affected. For Harry and Meghan, it was yet another layer of complication. They were not just facing financial exclusion, but the emotional weight of sibling disapproval played out in a high-stakes, publicized context. There's also a strategic element to consider. William, by exhibiting a controlled yet pointed reaction, reinforced his position within the family hierarchy. He wasn't the decision-maker in this scenario, that was Charles, but by allowing his feelings to be subtly visible, he cemented his influence over the narrative. It was a message to Harry, Meghan, and the world: I am aware, I am present, and I have my own stake in how this unfolds. In essence, William's reaction was a masterclass in psychological strategy, demonstrating the power of presence, perception, and calculated emotional display. But what did this smirk really communicate to Harry and Meghan? For insiders, the interpretation is chilling. It was not simply amusement at a brother facing consequences. It was a signal that the family had closed ranks, that deviations from expected behavior carried not just financial penalties, but social and relational repercussions as well. In a world where appearances matter almost as much as reality, this subtle gesture became a symbol of control, influence, and the complex dynamics that govern royal relationships. Harry, according to sources, recognized the weight of William's reaction almost immediately. The younger brother, usually quick with humor or deflection, reportedly felt a surge of emotional pressure. This wasn't just about losing access to funds. It was about understanding how deeply the family's judgment and alignment had shifted against him and Meghan. Every smile, smirk, or glance became a calculated assessment of his own position within the monarchy. The realization that his elder brother could witness, with apparent satisfaction, the consequences of Charles's decision only intensified the emotional and psychological strain. Meghan, too, reportedly noted William's reaction. Known for her ability to read rooms, assess situations, and respond strategically, she perceived the subtle signals and understood their significance. William's visible satisfaction wasn't merely a personal quirk. It was a calculated influence on the environment surrounding the purge. For Meghan, this meant reassessing alliances, reconsidering strategy, and preparing for a scenario in which the family hierarchy itself could become an obstacle to her personal and professional goals. This moment also highlighted a broader pattern within the family: the use of emotional cues as tools of influence. In a setting where verbal confrontation is often restrained, where decorum and tradition govern communication, nonverbal signals, smiles, glances, posture become incredibly potent. William's smirk functioned as both a personal expression and a strategic message. It communicated his stance on the situation, reinforced Charles's decision, and subtly underscored the limitations facing Harry and Meghan. In essence, a single expression carried layers of meaning that reverberated throughout the palace and beyond. Adding complexity to this dynamic was the public perception. While the palace prefers discretion, media outlets are quick to interpret even minor gestures as evidence of broader narratives. William's reaction, once leaked or observed by the press, became fodder for speculation. Was he vindictive? Protective? Strategic? Each interpretation added pressure to Harry and Meghan, amplifying the consequences of the purge beyond the walls of the palace. Suddenly, the private dynamics of sibling rivalry intersected with global scrutiny, creating an almost unbearable intensity for those directly involved. The stakes grew even higher when considering the long-term implications of William's response. Beyond the immediate psychological impact, his subtle satisfaction influenced how the public perceives royal unity, familial loyalty, and the hierarchy of influence. By appearing emotionally aligned with Charles's decision, William strengthened the perception of a cohesive front, projecting an image of the monarchy as disciplined, controlled, and internally coordinated. This, in turn, set the stage for future narratives in which Harry and Meghan would be seen not only as financially excluded, but also as socially and emotionally marginalized within the family structure. Sources close to the family report that William's behavior was not impulsive. There were long discussions, consultations with advisors, and careful consideration of how best to manage the optics. Every gesture, every expression, was calibrated to achieve maximum impact without overt confrontation. This demonstrates a level of strategic thinking that goes beyond typical sibling rivalry. It's a careful orchestration designed to communicate power, authority, and alignment with the patriarch, while subtly reinforcing the social hierarchy that governs royal relationships. And yet, for all the strategic calculation, there is an undeniable human element. William's satisfaction reportedly carried undertones of personal vindication. Years of perceived slights, media scrutiny, and public comparisons between the brothers may have contributed to a complex mix of emotions. The smirk was not just a response to a specific event. It was an emotional culmination of years of tension, rivalry, and observation. For Harry and Meghan, understanding the depth of this dynamic added another layer of psychological complexity to an already intense situation. By the end of this chapter, the emotional landscape is clear. William's smirk was not merely a passive observation. It was an active, strategic, and emotionally resonant act that shaped the entire environment surrounding the purge. Harry and Meghan faced the reality of financial exclusion compounded by the subtle psychological impact of a sibling who seemed to relish their predicament. The stakes were not just monetary. They were emotional, relational, and deeply personal. And yet, as the palace corridors hummed with tension, as advisors whispered and documents were finalized, one question lingered: how would Harry and Meghan respond? Would they accept the constraints imposed upon them? Or was there a counter-move, a strategy waiting to turn the tables in a way nobody anticipated? The next chapter promises to reveal Meghan's reaction. A fiery, calculated response that could shift the balance of power and challenge assumptions about loyalty, influence, and the limits of royal control. If William's smirk sent shockwaves through Harry, it was nothing compared to what Meghan's reaction would unleash. Known for her strategic mind, unflinching determination, and ability to command attention, Meghan Markle faced the news of being removed from King Charles's $770 million fortune with a mix of fury, disbelief, and calculated resolve. For many outside observers, it may have looked like a simple financial move, but to Meghan, it was a direct challenge, a personal affront, and a test of her influence within a family that she had fought so hard to integrate with. From the moment she heard the decision, Meghan's immediate reaction was a storm of emotion. Sources close to the couple describe a scene of intensity, planning, and relentless focus. Unlike Harry, who is reported to have felt a mixture of shock and hurt, Meghan quickly shifted into action mode. This was her signature response: take a blow, analyze it, and convert it into an opportunity for strategy and control. Every detail mattered: the timing, the optics, the messaging, and the leverage she could retain in the midst of what insiders call the purge. Her first step, according to palace insiders, was to assess the legal and financial implications. She immediately demanded a detailed breakdown of the trusts, investments, and assets that were being withheld or redirected. Meghan's meticulous attention to the structures of Charles's fortune revealed a deep understanding not just of money, but of the mechanisms of influence and power. She knew that this was about more than wealth. It was about autonomy, leverage, and positioning. Losing access to the fortune wasn't just a financial setback. It was a threat to her ability to operate within the family and the broader public sphere. But Meghan's response wasn't purely analytical. It was also fiercely emotional. Insiders describe her as visibly angry, pacing through the private quarters of her residence, processing the betrayal and the strategic implications simultaneously. Her reaction reflected both personal and professional stakes. On one hand, she was affronted by the perceived family disloyalty. On the other, she was acutely aware of how this decision could impact public perception, media narratives, and the couple's long-term plans. Every conversation, every media appearance, and every private discussion became a potential battlefield in the war over influence and narrative control. In her fury, Meghan reportedly took steps to ensure that the public narrative would not be solely controlled by the palace. She began drafting statements, coordinating with legal advisors, and planning a series of interviews and appearances that would assert the couple's agency. This was classic Meghan. Instead of retreating in the face of adversity, she doubled down, using strategy to transform a blow into a calculated countermeasure. She understood that losing access to wealth could be mitigated by controlling perception and influence. Public sympathy, carefully framed statements, and selective engagement with media channels became part of a carefully orchestrated response designed to neutralize the impact of the financial exclusion. The psychological element of her response is particularly fascinating. Meghan's fury was not simply a reaction to a lost fortune. It was a reaction to perceived betrayal and marginalization. She recognized that the removal from the trust was symbolic as well as practical. It signaled a questioning of her role within the family, a challenge to her authority, and a subtle attempt to undermine her influence. This realization fueled her determination. Every action she took was calculated not just to respond, but to assert power in the face of adversity. Her fury became a tool, transforming emotion into strategy. Meanwhile, Harry observed Meghan's response with a mixture of admiration, caution, and uncertainty. Sources describe him as initially overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment, but gradually aligning with her approach. Meghan's ability to process emotion, analyze the situation, and plan a multi-pronged strategy provided a blueprint for Harry to regain composure and assert his own agency. Together, they formed a united front, not just emotionally but tactically, preparing to navigate the financial and social consequences imposed by the purge. The palace, meanwhile, began to notice the shift. Meghan's reputation for strategic thinking and media savvy had always been well known, But her rapid mobilization in response to this crisis signaled that Harry and Meghan were far from passive participants. Sources suggest that advisors scrambled to anticipate their next moves, reviewing every potential legal challenge, media engagement, and public appearance that the couple could leverage. Meghan's fury had ignited a ripple effect that extended far beyond immediate family dynamics, influencing the broader ecosystem of palace politics, media coverage, and public perception. Interestingly, Meghan's response also had an emotional dimension that insiders describe as almost theatrical in its intensity. She reportedly engaged in private conversations with aides, expressing her anger and disbelief in vivid terms, while simultaneously mapping out a strategy that would project strength, resilience, and autonomy to the outside world. This dual approach, raw emotion coupled with calculated strategy, created a tension that few within the palace could fully comprehend. It was both personal and professional, intimate and public, and profoundly effective in signaling that the couple would not be easily marginalized. As Meghan mobilized, she also focused on narrative control. She and Harry began to plan how to communicate the story of the purge in a way that emphasized their agency and painted them as principled actors responding to injustice. Every interview, statement, and public engagement became a potential tool for reshaping perception, mitigating the impact of the financial blow, and asserting a moral high ground. The objective was clear. While Charles and William controlled the financial mechanisms, Meghan and Harry could control the story. And in the age of global media and social platforms, controlling the story is nearly as powerful as controlling the money. There was also a symbolic element to Meghan's fury. Insiders report that she made a point of highlighting her accomplishments, contributions, and influence within the family and in public life. By emphasizing her value, she framed the purge not as a justified removal, but as an affront to merit, vision, and initiative. This narrative, carefully constructed, created tension within the royal ecosystem, challenging assumptions about hierarchy, loyalty, and entitlement. Meghan's fury, therefore, was not just personal. It was a strategic intervention in the family's ongoing narrative. But the stakes grew even higher when Meghan began considering the long-term implications. Losing access to Charles's fortune wasn't merely a short-term setback. It threatened their ability to operate independently, fund philanthropic projects, and maintain the lifestyle and public influence they had cultivated. Sources suggest she immediately began exploring alternative sources of funding, legal avenues to challenge the exclusion, and alliances both inside and outside the family. Her fury, in this sense, was catalytic. It converted anger into action, transforming the emotional blow into a multidimensional response designed to preserve autonomy and influence. By the end of this chapter, the scene is set for a confrontation that goes far beyond money. Meghan's fury has shifted the dynamics of the purge, signaling that Harry and Meghan are not passive participants in this unfolding drama. They have agency, strategy, and a willingness to challenge expectations. William's satisfaction and Charles's decisive action have met their match, and the palace, advisors, and media now face a reality they may not have fully anticipated. Meghan Markle is mobilized, focused, and ready to fight back. Not just for wealth, but for influence, respect, and autonomy. And yet, the most shocking elements of her response are still to come. What Meghan did next would not just challenge the family internally. It would send shockwaves through the public, the media, and even international observers. The confrontation that followed would be unprecedented, and its consequences would ripple far beyond the immediate financial dispute. The moment Charles's decision became formal, the royal machinery shifted into overdrive. Harry and Meghan were no longer just facing a financial cut. They were confronting the full force of the legal structures that govern royal wealth, assets, and trusts. And in the world of British royalty, these structures are as complex as they are impenetrable to outsiders. The legal battle over access to Charles's $770 million fortune was not going to be a casual disagreement. It was a meticulously orchestrated clash of law, precedent, and family power. Sources reveal that the first steps in this legal saga were immediate. Advisors for the king and the palace moved to restructure trusts, amend beneficiary clauses, and reinforced the terms that legally justified the removal of Harry and Meghan. Every document was reviewed multiple times, legal language tightened to prevent ambiguity, and contingencies were considered for potential challenges. This was more than financial housekeeping. It was a tactical legal maneuver designed to assert absolute authority over the distribution of wealth. For Harry and Meghan, the reality was shocking. Losing access to a fortune of this scale is more than a financial inconvenience. It is an existential shift in their capacity to operate as senior royals, public figures, and independent actors. According to insiders, their initial reaction involved a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and rapid strategizing. They quickly realized that the battle was not just about money. It was about rights, influence, and the public narrative. The stakes were higher than anyone outside the palace could fully comprehend. The legal advisors representing Harry and Meghan reportedly scrambled to understand the precise mechanisms being used against them. Trust law, inheritance law, and complex financial structures intertwined in ways that required months, if not years, of expertise to navigate. Every clause mattered, every precedent could be decisive, and every possible interpretation had to be anticipated. The couple faced a situation in which the very rules of royal wealth could be leveraged against them, and the outcome would shape not only their financial future, but their standing within the monarchy. Sources describe intense meetings during these early days of the legal conflict. Meghan, in particular, was described as relentless. Every clause, every trust amendment, every letter was scrutinized. She demanded explanations, challenged assumptions, and pressed for transparency. Harry, while emotionally shaken, aligned with her focus, realizing that their public and private credibility rested on understanding and responding to the legal intricacies of the purge. Together, they became a unified front, combing through documents, preparing responses, and strategizing every move in what would become a high-stakes legal chess match. The palace, meanwhile, was not passive. Lawyers representing Charles and the royal estate coordinated behind the scenes, anticipating every potential counteraction. Internal communications emphasized that the exclusion of Harry and Meghan must be enforceable, defensible, and publicly unassailable. Statements, documentation, and legal justifications were crafted with precision, aiming to prevent both internal rebellion and public backlash. It was not simply a matter of financial prudence. It was about controlling perception and asserting authority. Adding to the intensity was the media spotlight. Every leak, every rumor, and every legal maneuver was magnified by global attention. Harry and Meghan were acutely aware that the public would not just interpret the events, they would judge them. In this environment, controlling both the legal strategy and the public narrative became critical. Every filing, every advisory consultation, and every statement had to be calculated to protect both legal rights and reputation. The stakes were enormous. One particularly challenging aspect was the timing of actions. Charles's advisors reportedly moved quickly to implement changes in trusts and accounts, while simultaneously managing the optics to minimize immediate public alarm. Harry and Meghan's team, in turn, needed to respond rapidly without appearing reactive or desperate. This created a tense environment in which decisions had to be precise, coordinated, and strategically timed. Mistakes could be exploited, delays could be construed as weakness, and public perception could turn sharply against them. As the legal battle unfolded, the emotional dimension intensified. Sources describe Harry as increasingly frustrated, feeling the weight of both familial rejection and legal complexity. Meghan's resolve, while steadfast, carried its own intensity, with the pressure of public scrutiny amplifying every action. Together, the couple had to navigate not only the legal mechanisms designed to exclude them, but also the psychological strain of being publicly and privately marginalized. The interplay of law, emotion, and perception created a crucible that few outsiders could imagine. One insider described a pivotal moment during these early legal exchanges. Meghan, reviewing documents late into the night, identified a clause that could potentially be challenged. This discovery sparked intense discussions, strategy sessions, and consultations with top legal experts. It became clear that the battle would not be a simple acceptance of Charles's decision, but a protracted engagement requiring precision, patience, and relentless attention to detail. Every argument, every clause, and every precedent could influence the outcome, and every public statement could be leveraged in the court of global opinion. The palace, aware of Meghan's determination, reportedly began to anticipate pushback. Advisors noted that her approach was not reactive but proactive, designed to create pressure points, identify weaknesses, and leverage both legal and public opinion. Charles's team recognized that while they could control the mechanics of the purge, controlling the narrative in the face of Meghan's strategic acumen would be far more challenging. The stakes were now psychological, legal, and reputational, converging into a battle that would dominate the family and media discourse for months to come. In the midst of this, William's subtle satisfaction remained a constant psychological factor. His presence, reactions, and public image added tension to an already high-stakes situation. Every legal maneuver by Harry and Meghan was amplified by the knowledge that William's attention, judgment, and emotional investment were part of the equation. The smirk, the observation, the subtle commentary, all became elements in a complex interplay of family dynamics, legal strategy, and public optics. And as the legal battle escalated, the first cracks began to appear in assumptions about loyalty, influence, and control. Sources suggest that advisors for Charles and William began to worry about unintended consequences. Could public perception, fueled by Meghan's strategic responses, undermine the authority and optics of the purge? Could legal loopholes or missteps provide avenues for Harry and Meghan to reclaim access, or at least secure leverage? The tension was palpable, with every party acutely aware that the unfolding drama was no longer just about money. It was about power, control, and the future of the monarchy itself. By the end of this chapter, the legal battle is fully underway. Harry and Meghan have mobilized, leveraging legal expertise, strategic insight, and public narrative to challenge the purge. Charles's team has implemented a meticulous plan designed to enforce exclusion and maintain authority. William's subtle satisfaction adds emotional complexity, intensifying pressure on the couple. The stage is set for confrontations, revelations, and escalating drama that will test loyalty, influence, and resilience in ways nobody outside the palace could predict. And yet, the most shocking turns of this legal battle are still ahead. What Harry and Meghan discovered next, hidden clauses, unexpected leverage, and potential alliances, would redefine the fight and challenge assumptions about who truly holds power in the royal family. In any legal dispute involving hundreds of millions, the devil is always in the details. For Harry and Meghan, discovering those details became their lifeline. As the purge by King Charles proceeded, the couple's legal team delved into decades of royal financial documents, trust agreements, and estate records. What they uncovered would shift the trajectory of the battle and reveal just how precarious the king's move